My sister dumped her kids on me for an 8-week vacation. When I refused and threatened to call the cops, she had me assaulted to take them back. Growing up is tough when you're constantly compared to your sibling and never quite measure up in your parents' eyes. Unlike real gold, kids who are raised as golden children don't always turn out to be the pure and perfect beings their parents think they are. Take my sister, for example. Ever since we were little, she always got her way, no matter how mean or unreasonable she was towards me. She'd get away with everything simply because she was the golden child, the miracle child in our family. Adding to her charm, she was gorgeous, with stunning curly hair and light eyes, and my mom couldn't help but compare us. I, on the other hand, had straight hair and dark eyes, and never matched up to my sister's beauty. As we hit our teenage years, my mom was always on my case, suggesting I dress like my sister or learn makeup tricks from her. But whenever I did ask for help, my sister would only mock or bully me. This constant comparison and my sister's attitude fostered a strong resentment between us. My sister seemed to absorb the worst traits we saw in our mom, while I did my best to reject them. Being idolized for her looks turned my sister into someone who cared only about herself, thinking she could do no wrong. My mom's constant comparisons left me with self-esteem issues. I grew up quiet and reserved. People even called me a pushover. In recent years, I've started therapy to try and build a bit of backbone, but it's hard. For the first time, I'm learning to stand up for myself in my relationships. The way my family treated me really affected my adult life, making it challenging to maintain healthy friendships or romantic relationships. My sister even went so far as to sleep with my boyfriend during our senior year in high school for no other reason than to upset me. She didn't even like him and often called him unattractive. When my parents found out, they just told me to let it go, showing once again how much they favored her. My dad's passive stance, as my mom belittled me, left me feeling like no man would ever stand up for me or find any worth in me, complicating my ability to trust and connect with people I date. Still, my entire life wasn't all bad. Growing up as the ugly sister meant I didn't have much of a social life, so I focused on my studies. I graduated from high school with a perfect GPA and snagged a full ride to my top-choice university. This was a big deal after my mom told me before high school that she'd be paying for my sister's college because she was the oldest, but I'd have to handle my own college expenses. I remember crying, asking her why she didn't love me like she did my sister, but she insisted she did and that my sister simply deserved it more. The day I got my scholarship, I was thrilled to have something my sister didn't. While she partied through high school without a care, I worked hard and achieved something meaningful. When I told my parents about the scholarship, all my dad said was, "Good job," and my mom didn't even look up from her phone. She ignored me all week afterwards. When I asked her why she was upset about my scholarship, she just avoided eye contact and left the room, making me realize how alone and unwanted I was in my own family. That day, meant to be a highlight, turned into one of the worst days as I cried myself to sleep, accepting that I'd never have the kind of loving family my sister did. That night, I poured my heart into my journal, deciding my life was going to be different. I was tired of being the sad little girl and resolved to turn my rage into academic success. Instead of begging for love and attention that would never come, I'd direct all my energy into my studies, aiming to be stable, independent, and smart, things my family could never give me. So yeah, I decided to focus on getting a good education, even if love wasn't in the cards for me. I threw myself into my studies, went to school, and graduated with honors. It paid off pretty well because I landed a fantastic job at the very company where I interned right after college. By the time I was 23, I was already making 6 figures, which was honestly amazing for me. Whenever I came home for the holidays, I'd update my family on what I was up to. Extended family members would throw compliments my way, which was nice. But my own parents? They hardly ever acknowledged my adult achievements or congratulated me. I knew not to share details about my high-ranking position or salary with my mom, as it would only make her resent me more. But I did tell my dad, and one year he told me he was happy for me. That was probably the nicest thing I've heard from either of my parents. Even now, as an adult, my mom seems to see me as an unwelcome guest, and on the rare occasions we see each other during the holidays, she'd do whatever she could to steer the conversation away from me. Like one Christmas, my uncle congratulated me on a promotion and a nice raise I had recently earned. I was even looking into buying my first house, which was super exciting. My uncle brought it up during dinner, which led to some nice words from other family members. But when one of my cousins asked where I was house shopping, my mom just cut me off, saying, "This is boring. Can we change the conversation?" I even overheard her mutter that it was all probably not true anyway. I did end up buying the house later, that year, and when I shared the news on social media, everyone in my family liked the post, except for my mom. I guess she was upset because my sister's life was going in a completely different direction. My sister had gone to college right after high school, with everything covered by my parents, but she dropped out, got pregnant by her first college boyfriend, and things spiraled from there. I suspect my parents might have pressured her to consider other options for the pregnancy. But she kept the baby and tried to make it work with her boyfriend, whom she'd only known for 4 months. They were clearly not meant for each other, but they still tried to patch things up by having a second child. I remember feeling heartbroken when she announced her second pregnancy, knowing how chaotic things were. Her boyfriend was someone I only saw at family gatherings, and he never even bothered to remember my name, let alone talk to me. He'd also come to our house for the holidays bringing food trays without contributing anything. Unsurprisingly, my sister and I never got along as we grew up, and after moving out of our parents' place, we practically didn't talk at all. We only kept tabs on each other via social media. During the rare holiday meetups, she'd throw snarky remarks my way about my weight or my fashion choices. I think it was all projection, since I enjoy wearing designer clothes and cycling through my collection of designer bags. She used to mock me, questioning if my purse was fake each time. One Thanksgiving, as soon as I walked through the door, she gave me the once-over and said, "I see you're all dressed up again like the stuck-up snob you are." It was a totally uncalled-for dig. Her behavior didn't stop even in front of her kids, who heard her cursing and throwing insults at me. I don't feel guilty saying that my sister is not a great person. My feelings hardened after she unexpectedly dumped her kids on my doorstep one day. I was just relaxing on a weekend morning after a hectic work week when the doorbell rang. To my surprise, there stood my sister's 10- and 7-year-olds carrying overnight bags. They told me their mom was off on vacation for 8 weeks and that I was supposed to watch them. I couldn't believe it. My sister and I hadn't spoken since our tense Jularth family BBQ, where she rudely commented on my eating habits. I had no clue why she assumed I'd babysit for 2 months without even asking. Her kids were sweet and seemed equally confused, so I let them in and tried calling her. She ignored my first 10 calls, but I kept at it until she finally picked up. As soon as she answered, I made it clear that I wasn't going to watch her kids. I even threatened to call Child Protective Services if she didn't come and get them. I was actually looking up CPS's number when she dropped a bombshell on me. Her tone turned dark and threatening as she tried to blackmail me. So here's what happened. I was on the phone with my sister, and out of nowhere, she suddenly threatened to call my workplace. She was all like, "I'm going to tell them you're not taking your bipolar meds and get you fired." Can you believe that? I was stunned because, let's be real, my sister has no clue about my job or how much it means to me. Losing it would be a nightmare, So I just hung up, totally overwhelmed. I was trying to figure out my next move, but my head felt like it was going to explode from all the stress. The thing is, not only did I not want to look after her kids, but I also had this trip planned. In a month, I was supposed to fly all the way to Australia to visit my boyfriend Eric and meet his family for the very first time. We'd been dating for quite a while, and I was excited about the trip. Meeting his parents was a big deal for me, and I really wanted everything to go smoothly. Now, all this chaos caused by my sister was making me question what to do, and I had no plan. I thought about calling someone, but who? I ended up calling my mom, even though I should have known she'd side with my sister, like always. I explained to my mom that my sister hadn't even bothered to drop off her kids herself, but my mom defended her, saying the kids were old enough to come to my place on their own. Then my mom started with the guilt trip, saying how much my sister had done for me and that I should help her out just this once since apparently I never do. That comment really set me off, and I ended up shouting at my mom. I demanded she give me just one example of when my sister helped me or improved my life in any meaningful way. I told my mom that both she and my sister had never really been there for me. They treated me like a stray dog instead of family. I practically begged my mom to come over so that, worst-case scenario, she could babysit while I went on my trip to Australia. I had little faith that my sister would come back for her kids, considering how quickly she dumped them on me. When my mom finally showed up, she was as chilly as ever, giving me that same old judgmental look. We sat down, and she began telling me, yet again, how I was being a terrible sibling to my sister. I tuned out her lecture about family and support, and instead demanded to know what magical vacation my sister was on that was so crucial. It justified leaving her kids with someone she knew couldn't stand her. Eventually, my mom's expression shifted, and she finally admitted that my sister wasn't on some grand vacation. Nope, she was being flown out by a sugar daddy. I honestly burst out laughing because I thought it had to be a joke. But my mom's face was serious. At that point, I was emotionally drained, and I went off on my mom. I asked her how she could be okay with any of this. I told her she had raised a daughter who chose jetting off to see a sugar daddy over getting a job to support her own children. Of course, my mom just threw my words back at me, defending my sister like she always did. Then she dropped this bombshell about how it didn't matter how much money I had or how nice my house was. I would always be the ugly duckling compared to my sister, born ugly and destined to die ugly. That was it for me. I had to stop myself from physically throwing her out. When I told her to leave, she yelled back that she wasn't moving. I tried to guide her toward the door, but she pushed me hard, right into my coffee table. That table had one of my favorite vases on it, a gift from my boyfriend during his last visit. It shattered into 1,000 pieces on the floor, and seeing it like that made me feel just as broken inside. I lost it. I had a full-on meltdown, screaming and crying, ordering my mom to get out or I'd call the police. I felt terrible, especially because I knew my nephews could hear everything from the other room. But I was a wreck by then. It was just such a long, painful day. After my mom finally left, my nephews peeked their heads out, looking all wide-eyed and nervous. They seemed so sad, and it broke my heart, even though I hardly knew them. They're just kids, after all. I felt like a real mess of a mom substitute, and my heart just went out to those kids. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I ordered us all some food from DoorDash, threw on some mestandes, ovies, and let them dive into video games in my living room until they zonked out. Finally, when I managed to get a hold of their mom, I couldn't help but let loose, yelling at her for flipping my world upside down. I even mentioned CPS again, but she just laughed this creepy laugh over the phone, reminding me it was all my choice, watch her kids or kiss my job goodbye. She twisted the knife, saying she knew I'd be nothing without my job, and that stung because it hit too close to home. My career's been my everything, and losing it is just not an option. I was in tears, asking why she seemed to hate me so much and had walked away from her kids for some sugar daddy adventure. She just shot back that she's the kind of woman who can rake in millions from a sugar daddy in a couple of months, unlike me. I think she was just trying to grind me down and make me feel small. I felt crushed and defeated, and honestly, it was working. After some back and forth, she hung up on me after dropping a final bomb about contacting my job, leaving me in tears again, feeling powerless. My nephews were downstairs, lost in a movie, so I called my boyfriend for some emotional backup. He's literally on the other side of the world, but he made me feel so loved and supported. He pointed out that my sister was possibly stepping into legal trouble by ditching her kids and using career threats as leverage. His suggestion was sly. Try to get a recording of her repeating those threats for proof. He knows my history with my family and flagged my sister as clearly unstable, warning her threats weren't idle. His advice was solid, though hearing it freaked me out. I knew firsthand how unpredictable my sister could be and decided to go along with the plan, even though I felt wrung out emotionally. But I still wanted to ensure my nephews felt at ease and cared for. I've walked in those shoes of feeling unwanted as a kid, and I was determined these sweet boys wouldn't go through that. I went downstairs, jumped into a multiplayer game with them, which was unexpectedly fun. They were adorable, surprised by my skills in first-person shooters, and their giggles were infectious as we played. I hadn't expected to bond with them after a weekend full of stress, but over pizza and playful contests, I realized how much I genuinely cared for these two. Their politeness and humor were such a contrast to their mom's neglect, and I was impressed by how they cleaned up and used their manners. Hanging out with them, though, I noticed their clothes were worn and downright small. I checked the rest of their packed stuff, and it was clear my sister had skimped on their needs. So, off to the mall we went for a wardrobe refresh. Seeing the joy on their faces as they ran through the mall almost made me cry. Being reminded of my own childhood neglect, I was determined they should feel valued and loved. So each time they wanted to explore a store, we did. I couldn't resist buying them treats and toys, especially when my youngest grinned his toothless grin at me. It tugged at my heartstrings every time. Wow, that was quite a day. So I took my nephews out and got them some new clothes that not only looked fantastic on them but felt comfy too. And, yep, I totally treated them to Nintendo Switches. It was tough not to spoil them, honestly. I mean, I don't have kids of my own and had some cash to spare, so why not give them a little joy? When they got the Switches, they both burst into tears and gave me the biggest hugs. On the way home, the 10-year-old started tearing up again. I asked him what was up, and through his tears, he asked why I was being so nice, and if they deserved it. The shint said hit me. I told him, of course you deserve it. You're my boys too, and every kid deserves happiness. That seemed to make him cry even more. He admitted he was mad at his mom for keeping us apart, which broke my heart. I reassured him, saying I was sorry we hadn't connected sooner, but was thrilled to have them with me now. As the conversation unfolded, I learned just how tough things were at home for them. Hearing them open up about my sister's neglect was heart-wrenching. I had always suspected something was off, but to hear it from them was devastating. Determined to make them feel at home, I whipped up a big dinner. They spent the evening playing on their new Switches, having a blast. Later, I went to my room to call my sister, trying my best to keep calm even though I was fuming inside. I had a plan, courtesy of my boyfriend. When the conversation drifted to the usual accusations, I brought up CPS and my sister lost it. She hurled threats, saying I'd be fired and calling me names. Honestly, she didn't sound right, maybe on something, because she kept ranting crazily. But I got what I needed. A recording of her admitting she'd lied to my employer. My boyfriend's idea to record her was genius. The next morning, before the kids got up, I called CPS. I laid everything out, telling them how my sister had abandoned her kids and manipulated me into taking care of them. CPS was surprisingly helpful. When I shared the recording, the agent said it was clear my sister was blackmailing and neglecting her kids. They promised to start an investigation right away. The aftermath was nerve-wracking. My mom called, and in my emotional state, I ended up in another argument with her. I accidentally let slip that I'd reported everything to CPS, and she hung up on me. Calling CPS was stressful, but necessary. I don't regret it, but I knew my mom would do anything to shield my sister, ignoring the well-being of my nephews. She's always been that way. I was left wondering what on earth would happen next. So, after I called CPS, my sister must have somehow sensed that I was trying to outsmart her. I could just feel it in my bones that she rushed to hang up on me so she could tell my other sister about what I did. There was no doubt in my mind that by the next morning, the whole family would already be buzzing about my little call to CPS. That night, I barely caught a wink of sleep, tossing and turning with worry. The next day at work, as soon as I stepped in, my receptionist gave me the heads up that my supervisor had urgently called a meeting with me before lunch. I mean, who schedules a meeting right before lunch unless it's super important, right? This got my nerves jangling, but deep down, I knew something like this was bound to happen. You see, my sister's always been a bit of a loose cannon, hell-bent on causing chaos in my life whenever she can. So there I was, sitting in the meeting room, fidgeting and cracking my knuckles nervously, trying to calm myself down. Across the table from me were my two supervisors, and alongside them sat some higher-up guy I had never even seen before. They all had this suspicious look in their eyes, making me feel like I was an insect under a magnifying glass. Soon enough, they laid it all out for me. Apparently, a so-called trusted source from my family had tipped them off, saying I was off my meds for some serious mental health condition. They even brought up specific instances of past mental health episodes I'd allegedly had. They were seriously worried I might snap right there in the office. But little did they know, I was totally ready for this showdown. My sister? Yeah, I always knew she'd carry through with her threats, desperate to sabotage my success and take me down a notch. She's always been bitter and envious, so taking away my cushy job would be the ultimate act of spite for her. Even if I hadn't contacted CPS, she'd have found another way to keep me under her thumb, probably holding it over me as blackmail. In a strange way, I was relieved to finally face this head-on and put an end to her nonsense. So, like a boss, I popped open my briefcase and handed out copies of my doctor's letter to everyone in the room. Along with it, I had all the paperwork that proved I was on top of my medication game, going back nearly 5 years. I had never missed a single prescription pickup date, and my mood was steady as a rock. To back it all up, I had verification from my primary care doctor, my therapist, and even my psychiatrist. I then gave my supervisors a quick rundown of the drama within my family, and explained that my sister had her own mental health issues. I assured them that the claims against me were totally bogus, and that they could trust my mental stability, thanks to the medical evidence I provided. They took their time poring through the documents, but once they saw it all backed by medical professionals, they seemed pretty satisfied. They even apologized for the trouble of dragging me into this meeting and explained that they had a duty to do their due diligence, considering the serious nature of the allegations. One of my supervisors even took the chance to praise my fantastic performance from the last quarter, turning the whole thing into a flattering session that left me feeling on top of the world. I walked out of that meeting practically giggling with relief and joy over how well it had all turned out. My sister's harebrained scheme had totally backfired, and I couldn't stop grinning like a fool for the rest of the day. I couldn't wait to call her up after work and rub it in her face that her plan was a complete fail. As soon as I got to my car, I dialed her number. I was practically in tears from laughing so hard as I filled her in on how the meeting was a total breeze, lasting only about 15 minutes, because she sounded so ridiculous and no one believed her nonsense. She was livid, no surprise there, and accused me of being a liar, certain I'd been fired and was just trying to cover it up. Her reaction only made me laugh harder, and I told her that she'd failed miserably at trying to get me canned, just like she'd failed at pretty much everything else in her life. I didn't hold back, laying into her about how her only talents as a woman approaching 40 were lying and failing miserably, to the point where even her kids were disappointed in her. That really set her off, and she kept calling me every nasty name in the book, claiming I'd stabbed her in the back. She then dropped the bombshell that she was hopping on a plane and was coming back home to make me pay for everything I'd done. I laughed it off as I ended the call, but as I got home and reconnected with my nephews, who were in a much better mood now that they were at my place, the realization hit me that the whole mess was far from over. My sister was coming back, and it could get way worse before it got better. All I knew for sure was that she was completely unhinged and now had nothing to lose. Honestly, I was a bit afraid of what the future held. The moment I started feeling uneasy about my own safety, my thoughts immediately went to my nephews. I began second-guessing my decision to involve Child Protective Services, CPS. A huge part of me wished my sister had somehow lost her passport overseas and never made it back home. Over the past few days, I had grown so attached to my nephews, and the thought of parting with them was already tearing me apart. I just couldn't bear to think about saying goodbye to those little guys and seeing them go back to my sister, who was just repeating the same cycle of negativity that our mom had put me through. Right then and there, it hit me how much I despised her, more than anyone else in the world. That night, as I checked in on my sleeping nephews, I found myself unable to sleep. My mind just wouldn't stop racing. I ended up quietly crying in the hallway after closing the door to the guest room because they were such sweet, innocent boys, and they didn't deserve any of this chaos. The next morning was complete mayhem. I was jolted awake by someone pounding on my front door. It honestly sounded like they were using a sandbag instead of a fist. When I opened the door, I was taken aback. My sister was standing there with this enormous guy. He had to be at least 6'5" and looked like he weighed nearly 300 pounds. Behind them, I could barely see my mom. Before I could even process what was happening or tell them to leave, this giant guy put his hand on my shoulder and shoved me to the ground with all his strength. Before I knew it, my sister, my mom, and this stranger were in my house, leaving me on the floor with my shoulder throbbing in pain. I started yelling at my sister for bringing this random guy into my home and screamed at him not to touch me, but it seemed like he only spoke Russian. I was utterly bewildered, but then I realized my sister had managed to outmaneuver CPS. They were scheduled to arrive at my place around 11 o'clock a.m., but she stormed in at 8 o'clock a.m. All the uproar woke my nephews, and they stumbled out of the guest room, rubbing their sleepy eyes. In a panic, I tried to shield them from this stranger, but my sister ordered him to put the boys in the car. Everything went wild. My nephews, upon realizing what was happening, begged their mom to let them stay with me. In that moment, I tried desperately to pull my oldest nephew away from the giant stranger's grip, but he grabbed my head and slammed it into the wall. My vision blurred with stars as I crumpled to the floor, watching helplessly as he carried my nephews out of my house. I was utterly powerless. My mom was in tears too, yet she left with them. As they prepared to leave, my sister walked over to me while I was clutching my head. When I looked up, she spat directly in my face. It was vile, and the single most degrading thing anyone's ever done to me. They all drove off in this massive black Suburban, a car I'd never seen my sister drive. The stranger's identity was a complete mystery to me, and I was in shock from the trauma my sister had just caused. They didn't even let my nephews take their clothes, game consoles, or have breakfast. My heart shattered for them, and it triggered an intense anxiety attack like nothing I'd ever felt before. I hadn't realized how deeply I cared for my nephews, how much I loved them, and wanted to protect them from everything I had to endure as a child. Now they were out there, frightened and without shoes, crammed into some random car with my unstable sister and this hulking stranger. I was appalled by my mom's behavior as well. How she could just watch as this enormous guy tossed me in my own home and pulled her grandkids away from their aunt without a word was beyond me. I couldn't stop the flood of emotions and thoughts about my nephews, even after my anxiety calmed a bit. I knew I had to act quickly and wisely, since he was slipping away fast. Once I pulled myself together, I immediately called the police. Thankfully, they were already aware of the situation due to the CPS investigation against my sister. I recounted every detail of the incident, although my voice was shaky. I did my best to stay composed. Describing the stranger was a challenge, but thanks to the nature of my job, I'm good at picking up little details. Somehow, I managed to recall every number and letter of the Suburban's license plate. I relayed to the police a full description of the stranger, the license plate, and what my mom and sister were wearing. Deep down, I suspected my sister might have been high on something because her actions were just so out of character, even for her. So, when she showed up at my place that morning, she looked like she had been on some kind of high. Her eyes had this wild, untamed spark, and honestly, I was convinced she'd been partying hard ever since she landed from wherever she'd been hanging out with her sugar daddy. My sister has always been a bit of a wild card, but this was on a whole new level. It was like she'd completely lost touch with reality. After I spilled all the beans to the cops about everything I could remember about her and the car she left in, I tried to distract myself. But, no surprise, it was impossible. I couldn't sleep, eat, or even zone out in front of the TV. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my nephew's little faces and couldn't think about anything except whether they were okay. I kept reflecting on how my mom constantly made excuses for my sister, letting her grow into someone who was, quite frankly, pretty toxic. I even found myself daydreaming about her trip and wondering just how much she'd dived into that sugar daddy lifestyle. Was it really worth whatever money she made? As I pondered, the idea of taking care of my nephews myself started to sound more appealing. I had the space at home, and my heart was ready to give them everything my sister couldn't. I imagined the scenario in a custody battle, picturing a judge choosing between my sister, who was off gallivanting overseas, and me, respectable and with my own office. Even when I tried to think positive, random worries about my nephew's safety kept creeping in. Like, who was that huge guy she brought over? Could he really be the sugar daddy? And was he anywhere near my nephews? I was just lying there staring at the ceiling, lost in these thoughts, when I finally heard back from the police. They'd been searching for the SUV she left in for hours, and finally tracked it down. The officer who called me back was really helpful, and filled me in on everything. When they tried to pull over the black SUV, things got chaotic. The guy she was with lost it, despite firearms being drawn, and actually tried to charge an officer. He got shot in the thigh after punching 2 officers, and my sister even attacked one trying to cuff her. I could hardly believe my ears. It was like a scene from a crazy TV show, but it was happening in real life, in my family. Then, just when I thought I couldn't be any more shocked, The officer said my sister wanted to talk to me. Really? Her one call was for me. The officer hinted she probably wanted bail money, which I totally wasn't going to provide. I told him I had no interest in taking her call, and he gave me a knowing chuckle. We wrapped up our conversation without me speaking to her, and though she was finally where she probably needed to be, I was still worried sick. My nephews were in CPS protection, safe, but I was counting down the days to my planned trip to Australia. Canceling would mean losing a ton of months, and potentially upsetting my boyfriend's family, who I hadn't even met yet but planned to be with long-term. So I called CPS to check in on my nephews, hoping to speak to them, but they weren't too cooperative. I tried explaining that I was one of the few stable family members they had, but they weren't budging. By that point, I was emotionally drained and running out of options. I spent the rest of the week packing for the trip, but kept breaking down into tears thinking about my nephews and their situation. It was tough because my boyfriend and I had been so looking forward to this trip. I've been planning for this trip for what felt like ages, and now that it was finally happening, I found myself completely overwhelmed and anxious. Throughout the week leading up to my flight, every conversation seemed to revolve around my nerves and stress levels. Even though my boyfriend was as kind and supportive as ever, I was still fuming over how my sister had treated her nephews and me. Her decision to run off with her sugar daddy had thrown my life into chaos. Luckily, my job was understanding, but the thought of my sister trying to get me fired left me feeling betrayed and distrustful of my family. It didn't help that my dad was somewhere, avoiding the drama, and my mom had always enabled my sister's poor choices. Watching my nephews end up in the care of strangers was heartbreaking. On the day of my flight to Australia, I was sitting at the airport bar, 2 cocktails deep, when I started flipping through photos of my nephews. We'd taken some silly pics in a photo booth at the mall, and looking at them made me cry all over again. I loved and missed them so much. Right then, I decided it would be the last time I cried until I got back to America. I was determined to enjoy the time with my boyfriend and his family, even though my sister's mess weighed heavily on my mind. Once I arrived in Australia, everything turned out to be amazing. I hadn't seen my boyfriend in months, and when he met me at the airport, he swept me off my feet in a burst of joy. Being back with him, surrounded by his warmth and kindness, was a balm for my weary soul. He pampered me throughout the trip, and meeting his family was a breeze. His parents were lively and fun, and we went on all sorts of adventures, exploring nature and soaking in some stunning views. One of the most unforgettable days was when my boyfriend took me to a hidden waterfall for a private hike. We swam, laughed, and shared the most romantic moments imaginable. It was perfect, and I couldn't believe how worried I'd been before the trip. Of course, reality hit hard when I returned home. The nightmare with my sister picked up right where it left off. A few days after landing back in the States, I found myself at the local police station, pressing charges against both my sister and mom for breaking into my home. They'd had a man physically remove me so they could storm in. I wasn't letting that kind of behavior slide. While there, I found out the CPS investigation was still ongoing, which was frustrating. If only they'd talked to my nephews, they'd understand what those kids had been through. My sister had been arrested with a guy who assaulted multiple cops, clear evidence of her unfitness as a parent, yet CPS was still undecided. I left the police station feeling a mix of relief and frustration, relieved that charges were filed, but worried sick about the unresolved CPS case and my nephew's well-being. My heart ached, knowing they were in the care of strangers, without any of their belongings. My youngest nephew had a little plush dog he took everywhere, and sleeping with it every night since they were taken made me want to cry. They were left without shoes that day, likely disoriented and scared, and all I wanted was to make things right. After weeks of daily calls to CPS, they finally reached a decision about a month after my sister's arrest. They removed my nephews from her custody for good, placing them in protective care. When they first told me, I was frustrated, asking how this was any different from before. They explained that now my sister would have to legally fight for custody if she ever wanted them back. So, here's the scoop. I was pretty sure that if I gave it a shot, I could win custody back of my nephews. A CPS agent mentioned it might depend on whether any other relatives showed up in court wanting custody too. As soon as I heard that, I was like, yep, that's my plan. I went ahead and filed a separate court case to try and gain custody of my nephews. Honestly, I didn't care about how long it would take or the cost of the legal fees. I was ready to go all in. I hired the best lawyer I could afford because I knew this was going to be a tough battle. But before the custody case even got going, we had to deal with the case against my sister for breaking into my home. I know some folks might judge me for dragging my own sister to court, but at that point, I was so mad I would have fought her in a Wendy's parking lot if I had to. However, I figured sticking to the legal route was smarter if I was going to have any chance of getting custody of my nephews. Getting them home with me was all I cared about. On the first day of our trial, seeing my sister in court was awkward, especially since it was the first time we'd met since she broke into my house and let that guy attack me. Our last interaction ended with her spitting right in my face. So it's safe to say neither of us was thrilled to see the other. As the trial kicked off, the judge brought up the custody case I'd filed against her. It seemed that her public defender hadn't given her a heads up, so she was finding out right there. My sister, never one to handle bad news gracefully, just snapped. Right in the middle of the courtroom, she turned to me, yelled my name, and lunged at me like she'd lost her mind. She clawed at my face and tugged at my hair until a bailiff managed to pull her off, but not before she bit down hard on my arm. It hurt like hell, and it even got infected. Seeing all this unfold in front of the judge, I had a feeling my sister just dug her own grave. It took nearly 2 years for all her criminal charges to be processed, and she ended up with a life sentence. There was no way she was getting out anytime soon, with her chances of appeal looking slim. I kept my charges of breaking and entering on my mom too, and she managed to avoid jail time only by testifying against my sister. Watching my mom throw my sister under the bus was weirdly satisfying. I couldn't believe she finally turned against her golden child, even if it took government intervention. As I watched my mom on the stand, I knew it was the last time I ever wanted to see her. I was done with her and my sister's toxicity. My sister had turned my life into a never-ending series of courtroom dramas, and I wanted a break from all the chaos. The custody battle dragged on as my nephew's birth father and his family fought me for custody, stretching it out even more. But I wasn't backing down. Once my sister was locked up, nothing could keep me from my nephews. After almost 2 years of back and forth in court, I finally won full custody. The day I brought my nephews home was unforgettable. Their smiles and tidan. The way they hugged me so tightly made it all worth it. I showed them the rooms I decorated for them, and my youngest nephew was over the moon when he found his Nintendo Switch again. I gave him his stuffed dog, and we shared a big hug. Then my eldest nephew joined us, and they both cried into my shoulder, telling me how much they'd missed me. My older nephew looked up at me with teary eyes and said, "Auntie, I knew you'd come back for us one day." And that was everything.